really don't know how many people survive. Even if you had the money, because of the shortages, you cannot buy meat, for instance. You cannot buy cheese. You cannot buy normal products, normal everyday products, because there was no production. They destroy all production. They confiscate more than 500 farms, for instance, in Venezuela. They confiscate factories in Venezuela. They create monopolies that, of course, then they are run by the military. They are run by the crooks and not by business people. People lost on average 20 kilos in 1 year. This was in 2018. On average, 20 kilos. You can imagine the level of starvation.
Wow.
Only 30% of people had the daily caloric standard, of 2,000 calories per day. There was a video game. I don't know the name. I never played it. There was a video game in which you can get money, the money of the video game, just by doing some kind of activity. There is stories on Reddit on how they literally were able to feed their families playing this game 24/7, which is astonishing.
It's crazy, right?
So one time the creators of this game said 70% of the people playing the game were Venezuelans.
That's awesome. How do you respond to this growing interest in socialist policies and communist policies and in like a lot of Western democracies, essentially?
There are two things that you need to tell. One, when you hear stories about how great a system is, how beautiful it was in certain countries, you cannot fail for propaganda. You guys need to have critical thinking. Talk to the people who escaped the country. Talk to the 8 million people who left Venezuela and ask them, why did you leave? Most of them will tell you, I left because I had nothing to eat, because they expropriate my business. The military took it over. That's what socialism. Socialism is rewarding people for political affiliation, for military affiliation, and the people who want to work hard, punish them.
Welcome to another episode of CypherPunk'd. Joining us today is Jorge Jraissati, president of the Economic Inclusion Group and a powerful voice for economic freedom. Originally from Venezuela, Jorge advocates for financial inclusion and human rights globally. He's advised governments, contributed to major publications, and is known for his work on the right to banking for vulnerable groups. Jorge, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for what you do in this amazing, amazing set.
Glad to hear it. I'm still very new at this. So can you tell me about the Economic Inclusion Group? And I was searching for a website earlier. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, at the Economic Inclusion Group, we try to fight for economic and financial inclusion for the reason that we saw that there are many vulnerable groups that are not being able to access even financial services. For example, human rights activists, immigrants, young entrepreneurs from Latin America. They cannot even open a bank account. Why? Because of senseless regulations, because of attacks from authoritarian regimes. So just to give you an example, human rights activists who operate in Venezuela or in Ukraine, they cannot even open a bank account because they are deemed as too risky of clients. So what we do is that we advocate for their financial rights. We advocate for what we call a right to banking for all people. And that's the majority of our activities. Beyond that, we try to also push for more economic opportunities for young people because we believe that if the world continues into this direction, in which people don't have economic opportunities, in which people cannot open businesses, in which people cannot innovate because of too much regulation, too much compliance, I believe that that's not the way to go. So that's what we work on.
Very interesting. Tell me about your website. What's going on there?
So in my website, we had to put a pause on the website because when we work in Venezuela in this difficult context, we're often victims of hacking attempts. We are victims of attacks. And in my case, I had a website before in which one day I saw the website and I saw that it said that it was hacked by the Chinese government. I don't know if they actually were the one who did it, but the reality is that it happened. So right now we're trying to build more security. We're trying to do it in a more professional way so it doesn't happen again.
I'm going to connect you with Flux. Our website actually is hosted on their decentralized cloud. So we're a big advocate. And of course, this podcast, freedom, privacy, but also decentralization and decentralized technologies that can help protect against some of these more centralized attack vectors. And, obviously nothing is perfect yet, and we're still working on a lot of these technologies are still being developed and they're in beta. But these types of things are very important in the future. And I'm definitely going to connect you with the team there.
Please do, yeah, because we need it and we need to be always at the forefront of these issues because regimes, they have all the money in the world, they have all the instruments. So We always need to go one step ahead of them.
As someone from Venezuela, how has your experience with economic collapse shaped your views on financial freedom and inclusion?
It shaped my entire life, honestly. Just to grow up in a place in which you see your family's savings being liquidated because of hyperinflation, in which you see people just from being a rich country with good opportunities to being a country in which people are literally in starvation.
Mm-hmm.
I saw how, for example, I saw military people going to businesses, making them put certain prices to products one day, collapsing their inventories.
Wild.
In Venezuela, they put a 30% profit margin. That, of course, was a nominal profit margin. So in reality, it was below what it cost, these products.
Mm-hmm.
People lost everything. They put production quotas to factories. They put exportation and importation quotas, currency controls. So they literally established almost a Soviet economy in Venezuela. This is the context in which I grew up. So I remember just seeing my parents and friends of my parents just complaining about how their life savings, their life work was destroyed by a set of bad economic policies. And I remember that from being a middle income country with good opportunities, growing, we passed being one of the poorest countries in the world.
I remember at one point Venezuela was, I think there was like the crown jewel of South America. I mean, I think maybe it was the early 90s maybe or something. Some people told me about it. Like, it was one of the wealthiest and, most capitalist, economically wealthy countries there was, right? And now we're...
Yes. Venezuela in the 1980s was the richest country in the region.
Wow.
Our GDP was 2.5 times the average in the region. Our country was, in terms of GDP per capita, top 30 in the world. We were around the same level of income as countries like Greece, just a bit below Spain, the United Kingdom. So Venezuela, by all means, was a developed country with a ton of problems, with poverty, but way ahead of its peers.
But heading upwards, yeah.
Heading upwards. In fact, from 1920 to 1980s, our GDP growth per capita was the highest in the world. We grew by 6.4% per year. That's comparable to Chinese levels of growth per capita. So all that, Venezuela was in the right direction, was a development story, was also a democracy. If you remember the 1980s, there was dictatorships in all over Latin America. You had dictatorships in Argentina, in Brazil, in Paraguay, and in Colombia, you have almost a civil war scenario. Yeah. And Venezuela was seen as the oasis of freedom, democracy, economic development, everything to be successful. And if you have asked all the analysts at the time, you have asked all the policymakers, nobody would have predicted what happened. I believe that there is something that has to be learned from this experience, which is that all countries can collapse. All countries can become a Venezuela. So you need to always protect your freedom. Usually when people think about poverty, they think about, let's say, African countries, or they think about Haiti, countries that for some reason historically they have been poorer, less richer than its peers. But what Venezuela is really powerful example is that it shows how a rich country becomes extremely poor. It's not only that it becomes a bit poor, extremely. We have 90% of poverty, 70% of extreme poverty. 30% of our population have had to leave the country, seeking opportunities, just walking through the border because they cannot feed their families.
Yeah.
So that's the situation.
I saw a grandmother talking about how she fled the country, and she basically was in tears crying, essentially. Like, she had saved for her grandchildren to go to college, and she had her life savings. And within weeks, she lost almost everything. I mean, she was basically saying, all I have left is enough to take a flight to the United States to get out of here. I mean, that to me, watching that was, the regimes that have done this, Maduro's regime or Castro's regime, whoever was in power for this hyperinflation, just the amount of human suffering, pain, theft of essentially their life savings. I mean, the abuses are just unfathomable. It's deeply disturbing watching that grandmother talk about basically her life savings being just taken away from her.
Yes.
She's not a unique story. I mean, that's everybody.
That's everybody's story. It's like this is the story of almost 30 million people. I was telling your friend outside that most heartbreaking thing is just to see people that 5 years ago they were having a good middle class life, upper middle class life. They were architects, engineers, professors, even doctors. And now, because of all the situation, they have to move to another country and do whatever job they can to literally survive. So you see how part of their identity is literally stripped from them. Their pride, their sense of accomplishment, everything is taken away from them. And these are people who need our support, not only financially, but they even need hope for the future. So they need hope that they can rebuild their life, that they can come back to their country once again. And this is part of the job that we have to do.
I remember years ago, and I didn't really understand a lot about economics or money or any of these things, socialism, capitalism. I think it was maybe a decade ago even at this point, when I was playing a video game and I had a guy who was in one of my guilds in the game, like was playing this like kind of like it's similar to World of Warcraft, but not World of Warcraft. And I just remember he was leaving Venezuela and he was asking us to sell him the currency of the game, which was we call it these like they're like these jewels, and everybody used those as money. And this is when I hadn't quite heard of Bitcoin yet, but when I did eventually hear about Bitcoin, I was like, it just clicked for me, because like this was one of the things that was like, this guy literally put his life savings into a video game, item, little money from the video game. And basically his plan was like, I'm going to sell all my bolivars or whatever on on these little messaging apps or whatever we used at the time, and to the rest of the guild, and get essentially these jewels. And I was going to hold those little video game items in this video game, and then I was going to go to the United States and then sell those for dollars. I mean, just to think about that now is like, it's crazy, but that just like the currency in this video game held its value better than a national currency that was being debased by I mean, that's just crazy to me to even think about.
Yes. I mean, like going even further, there are stories of people who, through video games, they were able to feed their families in the worst period of hyperinflation. In Venezuela, there was a moment in which we had a minimum wage of roughly, I'm not kidding, $5 per month because of hyperinflation.
That's unfathomable.
I remember a teacher telling me, Jorge, I worked the entire month. When I received the paycheck, I saw, and what it was worth is a gum, literally, like just to buy gum, to go buy some Trident on the coffee shop.
How do people survive?
That's an excellent question. People lost on average 20 kilos in 1 year. This was in 2018. On average, 20 kilos. You can imagine the level of starvation.
Wow.
There was a statistics done that year by the United Nations, in which only 30% of people had enough the daily caloric kind of standard, of 2,000 calories per day. People really survive with people abroad sending them money. They survive with the little they had of savings. And they survive, I really don't know how many people survive. It's astonishing. When you have this level of humanitarian crisis, people, all the money they had was to buy food, was to buy bread, was to do arepas, which is what we like to eat.
I love arepas.
They're amazing, no? So, yes. So we had arepa, we have cachapa, these different things, because even if you had the money, because of the shortages, you cannot buy meat, for instance. You cannot buy cheese. You cannot buy normal products, normal everyday products, because there was no production of them. They destroy all production. They confiscate more than 500 farms, for instance, in Venezuela. They confiscate factories in Venezuela. They create monopolies that, of course, then they are run by the military. They are run by the crooks and not by business people. So yeah, people, how they did to survive in this way. And specifically on this video game thing is interesting. There was a video game. I don't know the name. I never played it. There was a video game in which you can get money, the money of the video game, just by doing some kind of activity. So you get gold. And then you're able to trade that gold. There were people
That's World of Warcraft. I think they use what they call it gold.
Okay, so there was, but it was they told me a very rudimentary game.
Yeah.
So that way they can use it on very cheap Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's not the one that you mentioned.
Okay.
It's like a very rudimentary.
Maybe RuneScape, I think, was the original, like.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I believe it's that one. So there is stories on Reddit, for example, of people telling their story on how they literally were able to feed their families playing this game 24/7.
Yeah.
Which is astonishing.
It's crazy, right?
So one time, I remember just reading about it, that the creators of this game said that 70% of the people playing the game were Venezuelans, you know?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Again, it shows that people want to get better in life. They want to survive, and they want to bring food to their table. When I come sometimes to the US, or when I go to Europe, and I'm having debate at universities, for instance, and I'm having debate with professors or with even students, sometimes they have this ideological mindset, right? They told me about big ideas about socialism. They told me about big ideas about the future of communism. And I tell them, guys,
it's failed every single time.
It has failed every single time.
And resulted in massive, untold amounts of human suffering, loss, destruction. I mean, how do you respond to this growing interest in socialist policies and, communist policies in like a lot of Western democracies, essentially?
First, there are two things that you need to tell them. One, you need to tell them, look, when you hear stories about how great a system is, when you hear a story about how beautiful it was in certain countries, you cannot fail for propaganda. I tell them, you guys are smart. You guys are in university. You guys need to have critical thinking. Don't ask me, because of course I'm a political activist, I'm an economist, so you can maybe say that I have an agenda. Talk to the people who escaped the country. Talk to the 8 million people who left Venezuela and ask them, why did you leave? Why did you leave? And most of them will tell you, I left because I had nothing to eat, because they expropriate my business, because the business I was working on, the military took it over. That's what socialism. Socialism is rewarding people for political affiliation, for military affiliation, and the people who want to work hard, punish them all the time.
That's just the way the incentives play out, right? One of my favorite quotes is, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome, right?
Exactly.
Yes. In theory, all this stuff sounds great, but in actual practice, the incentive structure is just not set up to correspond with human nature. It always results in failure.
Yes. There is something, exactly. First, show me the incentive, show me the behavior. I will show you the behavior. In countries like Venezuela, the problem is that there is this more socialistic mindset among people. And why is that? We need to understand also the history of way countries develop. Venezuela is a country rich in oil. We have a ton of oil. We have a ton of resources. So then all the political narratives run around the idea or how to distribute those resources properly. So all the political narratives, when you're in the opposition, you say that the government is not distributing them correctly. And that place go on and on. That mindset came to the mind of people. But that's a fundamentally wrong way to see the economy, because the economy is about creation. It's about creating wealth. It's about putting conditions of how to people be productive, how to create businesses, how to innovate. If you give the government the arbitrary power or distribute huge chunks of money, we're talking about every year, there was one point in which we received $100 billion just on oil revenues. We received $1 trillion in 15 years of Chavismo regime, which for a country like Venezuela, that's roughly right now 12 years of exports. Huge chunk of money to the hands of a few elites in government. Without accountability, what are the incentives? What will happen? They will use this money to establish a dictatorship. They will use this money to pay crooks inside the country. They will use this money to pay elites inside the country. They will use this money to pay for politicians in other countries to support you. You will buy diplomacy with oil. You will buy lobby firms in Washington to do lobbying for you. So this idea that government will distribute money equally according to the equity and according to the needs of the people. It's a beautiful idea in theory. Because
true, it is a beautiful idea in theory. The problem is the actuality is never that.
It is never this. Like, because
humans, we're imperfect. We're flawed, right? Nobody is perfect. And, people, as much as they want to say one thing or the other, someone somewhere is going to be corrupt. Someone is going to make what the best decision is for themselves, right? I mean, it's part of human nature, right? When you add the human equation into it, unfortunately.
Yes.
And there are good people, right? And even, bad people have some good qualities and good people have some bad qualities, right? So it's part of the human experience, right?
Yes, exactly. Like, you need to, when you study about the way institutions are developed, this is me personally, my main area of interest. How economic institutions are developed. How can you build them in ways that deliver good social outcomes? How can you build also good political institutions? When you do this, you need to always think, how can you build institutions that are protected against the worst of actors? So you don't develop institutions to having angels running them. You develop them in a way you're protected from the worst of the worst. And that's the way, for example, the US was built. Check and balances.
Yeah.
You have limitations.
The Constitution, individual rights. Me and Ludo just spoke about that on the previous episode we had. It was a big topic of discussion. But yeah, I mean, the founding fathers of America really took into account, hundreds and thousands of years of political organizations, from kings and queens to, democracies like ancient Greece and republics. And they founded this constitutional republic that exists here, right? That makes the foundation of human rights, this idea of this constitution and your Bill of Rights, these, freedom of speech, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, the right to bear arms, right? And we see the infringement of these rights now by this current government that exists. I mean, this is so fundamental to America, and this is so fundamental to, the rights of the individuals of this country and what everything was founded on. And we see just total violation of that going on, even right here in this Western democracy that we suppose we live in, right? It's unfathomable, right? It clearly says, like, the rights of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And like, it couldn't be any clearer than that. Whether you believe in guns or you don't believe in guns or you don't like it, or it makes it whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. That is a right that we as citizens have. Yet that right is constantly under attack, right? But that's the way these are the founding principles of the nation, right? So a lot of people are confused that, things don't just change because the majority of people want this or the majority of people want that. These constitutional rights that everybody enjoys is to protect the minority against the majority, right? There's more to it than just, the blowing winds of consensus of every little idea, right? These are so fundamental to this nation and why 300 years today we're still here, right? Where it's like what you described, it's like there was democracy and then gone overnight, right? One change of the power swing. The founding fathers of our nation set up this country to prevent that. So even though one side would get power, another side would get power, there's a check and balance there, and then everyone has these individual constitutional rights.
Yes, exactly. Like, it's in fact, it's one of the biggest in economic development. It's one of the biggest puzzles of all time, because let's go back to the time in which the founding fathers were just emerging, or even before. Let's go to the 16th century or something. Like, in Latin America, you have developed already a civilization before. You have the Mayas, you have the Aztecas, you have some infrastructure there. The US was a playing field in which there was no development before. It was very rural, nomad communities. And then 400 years after, then one region is extremely developed and the other region continues to be poor. And one of the answers to this is because the founding fathers of the U.S., they developed institutions based on for example, John Locke ideas of limiting power and Montesquieu, division of powers, and the idea that the Constitution was to protect people from government attempts, because the government has the force. Monopoly of violence is the concept of Max Weber developed, that the government or the state has the monopoly of physical violence. So you need to have them in check. They have the military, they have the police, they have the economic, political power to ask for taxation. So the founding fathers developed this country under that mindset. In Latin America, and in the case of Venezuela, we have the complete opposite mindset. If you see the ideas that have been always famous in Latin America are more the ideas of, for example, Rousseau or the French philosophers, in which it was the opposite. It was, we need to empower government because government has to then protect people. They have to give people this concept that Americans have of the difference between negative liberty and positive liberty. Negative liberty is the liberty to be protected from coercion from government. Positive liberty is the liberty to give you tools to then develop in life. In Latin America, it's all positive liberties. It's all, let's give to people. There is some room to this, don't get me wrong. But if you forget that your basic liberty is your freedom for speech, your freedom of assembly, your freedom to have your own religion, your freedom to have your own political affiliations, and your freedom to do business, do commerce.
Private property rights, essentially, is what you're talking about.
Private property rights.
And that's the basis for a prosperous society, right? And socialism and communism is a direct attack on that. And that's, has resulted in abject failure over and over again. And, the United States, and you just described it so eloquently. I mean, the most powerful, successful nation in all of human history, essentially, the most powerful, and still today, right? But like you said, I mean, that these things can change, right?
They can change so easy, so quick, but at the same time, you don't realize. It's a process that can take, let's say, 10 years. In 10 years, you can have a country that doesn't resemble anything what used to be ago. But people don't realize it because everybody has their own life. Everybody has their own things to take care of. But then politicians start crossing red lines. They start weaponizing judicial system.
We're seeing that here.
We're seeing some sense here in the U.S.
I mean, that's, unfathomable. You'd think that one political party would weaponize the Department of Justice and attack his own political opponent. I mean, that is not something that happens, that we think of happening in a first world.
Yes.
It brings me back to I think it was maybe 8 years ago now when, I think Trump was debating Hillary Clinton, and he kind of said, she said some comment under my administration, this, and Trump responded by saying, well, that's because if I win, you'd be in jail. But, he was joking, right? Obviously, that was a joke. And everybody's laughing, And the reason it was funny is because it was a joke, because it's so ridiculous. You know what I mean? Of course, you're not going to jail your political opponent, but he just said it in a funny way, and as a comedian. But then, of course, he got power, and of course, he didn't jail his political opponent, right? But when the pendulum swung the other way, I mean, look what's happening, right? I mean, that's whether you like the opponent or not. I mean, this is a dangerous game, because when your person is now, when the pendulum swings back, there's this response, right? Oh, you came after me, now I'm going to come after you, and then it just becomes the status quo, right? We end up look at Russia, right? I mean, whatever you think of Putin, the guy jails all of his potential rivals. I mean, he finds some crime. It's it's this Soviet thing, right? It goes back to Stalin. It's show me the person and I'll show you the crime, right? It's we all have, things that, the systems are so, if they want to get you, they're going to get you somehow. Even here in the United States, they've created so many swamp agencies and so many, the IRS and all these rules and all these different things. It doesn't matter how good you try to play it. I mean, if they want to come after you, there's some way that they can try to come after you, right?
Yes, I remember years ago I saw an interview between, you remember Anthony Bourdain, the famous guy, the chef.
The chef, yeah.
So he was having an interview with actually Boris Nemtsov, who was the Russian opposition leader. He was killed, by the way, 10 years ago already. He was having an interview with him where he were talking about corruption. Boris Nemtsov, what he told him is that every country there's corruption. The US, Venezuela, in every country in the European Union. The difference is that in countries like Russia, corruption is not a problem. Corruption is the system itself.
Yeah.
Corruption is the thing that glue the system together. So in that sense, what these countries are is in which everybody has some kind of, again, as you mentioned, some crime in their head. Everybody is within the system, the politics, the business people, everybody. How can a country flourish that way? It's impossible. Yeah. Corruption is just not a small thing that happens. Corruption is the essence of the system. And about crossing red lines, as you mentioned, the US that I believe in, for example, and the US that I always admire is the US in which you had rule of law, you have division of powers.
Yeah.
You have a consensus in which if you lose your election, then the other candidate is not the enemy of the state.
Yeah.
It's not somebody that you hate. It's just a political adversary with different ideas, with different perception. But what I see now,
There's some level of civility there. And
there was a huge level of civility. Like I remember, again, just watching the way debates were 20 years ago. There was a level of civility. There was no weaponization of the judicial system. So that's on the political sphere. You see a complete degradation. And that also reflects in the way people, in the trust people have on democracy. Like if you see all the indicators from the early 2000s, US was the country in which people had more belief in their democracy.
Yeah.
If you see it now.
I felt that way.
Oh, you felt that way?
Today, it's like rigging elections, doing all sorts of crazy things. I mean, it's like jailing political opponents, pushing massive propaganda. I told Luda that, like, you know, if you look at polls or if you look at the data, it's like trust in traditional media is like at 15%.
Yeah.
I mean, half these media channels nobody's watching anymore. Everyone's on X now. Like, you know, CNN had a $10 billion loss because all they're doing is lying constantly, whether it's the FBI, all these intelligence agencies just telling them what to say. There's so many posts of, like, you go to all these different channels and they're just all reading from a script saying the same thing. It's like, I mean, this is like, you're not journalists. You're just a propagandist. You're just like, you know, it's like George Orwell, Animal Farm.
Yeah. Even though I want to ask you, because something that I saw astonishing to me was after this first debate between Trump and Biden. So I really thought that everybody knew that Biden was extremely old.
Yeah.
I thought that everybody knew that Biden was not in the best cognitive capacity at the time.
Yeah.
What I found astonishing is that many people were actually shocked about it. Do you have the same reaction from your people around?
I participate in a lot of different conversations, and, you know, I've got friends that are on the other side and they just believe the propaganda. It's like, dude, I've been telling you this for 4 years. The guy has dementia. I mean, like, he had all the signs. Even in the previous debate, there were times that I watched where he would, like, say something and then he would short circuit and repeat it over. I mean, that's like, these are like clear signs of, like, you know, Alzheimer's / dementia. So to me, it was like completely obvious. I mean, the amount of, like, you know, fuck ups that he has on TV constantly, but the media is literally the enemy of the people. I mean, they're like suppressing the story the whole time. I mean, just like anybody with a brain could tell, you know, and now the media is like shocked. Like, it's just like hey, we all have to admit it now because the debate everybody saw, like, we can't lie about it anymore. It's like, you know, you guys are all complicit. You guys are all just a bunch of liars. You know, it's like, you knew this was going on. You were just running cover, right? I mean,
yeah, and this is part of the trend that, for example, you asked me before about differences between Venezuela and the United States, and wanting to avoid things that I used to see every day in Venezuela to become normal in the US. There were things in the US that people respected the media, for example. People, you may disagree with CNN, but there was some kind of understanding that they will not lie to you. The same time, you may disagree with a political candidate, but there was an understanding that the judicial system will not go against them. And similarly, if you have, again, you have some kind of civility. So something that I think people like me have to do is to find ways to convince Americans or to raise awareness about Americans, to talk to policymakers, so that political norms that you have in Venezuela doesn't translate into what we have in the US. Weaponization of finance is another very important.
We're feeling that. I mean, you know, as a crypto company, my main company is, you know, we're operating in the, you know, Bitcoin cryptocurrency space, Web3 space, and, you know, it's been, the past 4 years have been awful. The attacks, you know, the debanking attempts, the abject, in my opinion, you know, disregard for the Constitution and the rule of law. You know, the current administration in power that is weaponizing the financial system. I think it's like the FDIC, or I think the guy in power, his name is Marty Gruenberg. He was in power during the Obama administration previously, and what they did was essentially use the banking system, use the government to attack illegal companies behind the scenes by threatening the banks that were banking them. Really? So this was called Choke Point 1.0, and, you know, companies like that you might not like, or just whether it's marijuana companies or porn companies or gun companies or whoever they just didn't like, you know, whatever was convenient for whoever they were whatever companies they politically disfavored, they attacked those companies and basically threatened the banks behind the scenes to debank and end the relation, you know, basically going around the rule of law, because they know that the Congress and the separate branch of power had said, no, these are legal companies. You might not like it, but, you know, they're legal, right? So instead of respecting, you know, like you said, the separation of powers, they decided that they were going to unconstitutionally go around that and put pressure on essentially these companies behind the scenes through the banking system. And this went to court and they lost. They were told by the judge, this is blatantly unconstitutional.
Who lost in this
the government lost. There was the judicial system checked the power of these of this government agency, right, and said what you're doing is completely unconstitutional. Fast forward, the Trump administration. I think the Trump administration had, I think it was Brian Brooks. He became the comptroller of something, a controller of the. He was in power in one of these organizations, and they passed a executive order or a law, or they attempted to put forth a new rule that said, we're not going to discriminate against companies. It's not our role, and whether we like the company or don't, it's we're going to keep it an even playing field. That's going to be part of our practice of this organization, right? Of the Office of the Comptroller or the FDIC, whatever it may be. And the second the Biden administration came into power, they brought the same guy back from the Obama administration, this Marty Gruenberg. If you look him up, Paul, can you pull this guy up? He's terrible regulator. There's rampant sexual harassment, all sorts of problems going on. He's claimed that he will resign eventually. But, I think there's been over 200 complaints of mismanagement, abuse, sexual harassment, all sorts of stuff going on. And when he's been in power, there he is, Martin J. Gruenberg. He's the head of the FDIC. So this guy is the head of the FDIC. He's the chairman of the FDIC, and he lost, in courts with Choke Point 1.0, and he's now back in power doing the same thing to cryptocurrency companies and to Web3 companies and Bitcoin companies and the blockchain companies. And this is just their modus operandi. This is how these authoritarians behave, right? The court system told them, no, this is unconstitutional, yet 4 years later back in power doing the same thing, right? So in my opinion, he should be in prison. I mean, that's, a blatant disrespect for the court system. They warned you, they told you this was unconstitutional, and here you are doing it again, right? It's like, you don't care about the rule of law. You don't care about the Constitution. You don't care about the separation of powers. You're an authoritarian, and this is what you believe. Now, if you look him up, you can see, Paul, if you do a little research on him, look at all the sexual harassment claims, all the stuff that's going on in his organization, and he still has not resigned. There's no accountability, right? It's like there's massive. I mean, we're talking about not just one person, not just two people, like 50, 100 people coming forward with complaints, problems. I wouldn't put this in ChatGPT. I mean, they input their little propaganda into the model, but so here it is, handling of bank failures, Operation Choke Point. So here it is, Operation Choke Point. During his tenure, the FDIC was involved in a controversial program known as Operation Choke Point. This program, initiated by the U.S. Department of Justice, sought to cut off financial services to businesses deemed to be at higher risk for fraud. Critics accuse the FDIC of unfairly targeting legal businesses such as payday lenders and firearms dealers, leading to accusations of overreach. So here he is still defending the FDIC's actions. I mean, see, this is their little angle here. And it's just total full of shit. Yeah. So here is OpenAI lying to you about actual reality. Type this in, search on it on an unbiased browser. Maybe he doesn't have any claims himself against him, but the way he's run his organization, I'll see what pops up. So here it is right here. See how these woke AI models are getting all the propaganda in it, and they just lie to you about reality, about what's happening. It's like Google hiding the search results about assassination attempts. It's just bullshit. FDIC Chair Martin Gruenberg to resign after sexual harassment allegations. So this is an article from 2 months ago. The guy still has not resigned. After months-long scandal over misconduct at top bank regulator, Gruenberg said he would step down once a successor is confirmed. So when is the successor going to? I mean, this is unfathomable. I mean, imagine, this is just unbelievable, right? So they just sued another crypto bank called People's. I think was it People? It was Customers Bank. I think what it was called the other day. No, I mean, I was just illustrating a point, but he's still in power. He still hasn't left, which is just crazy to me, right? And now they're doing the same thing. I don't know when the Web3 crypto community needs to organize and file a lawsuit against this. And the problem is these people have no accountability, right? The government has no accountability. There's never any accountability, right? But it's just one small little rabbit hole example of what we're talking about.
Yes, exactly. But it's an example of how. Yeah. Again, like the U.S. develop and the U.S. prospers, and the U.S. is a good country when you have rule of law in place. If a company is illegal, then it's illegal. But then if it's illegal, it's because it has to go through a process in Congress. It has to go through accountability mechanisms. But the problem is that governments are finding ways to do these kind of actions through ways in which there is no accountability.
Exactly.
It's that they do from soft perspectives. And I think what politicians need to understand is that today they are in government, tomorrow they're in opposition.
Yeah.
So they need to be really careful to which tools they create to harass companies, to harass people, because otherwise you will go into a political equilibrium in which whoever is in power
is going to prosecute whatever companies and businesses you like, right?
Yes.
So, and that's, and I think despite all of Trump's rhetoric, his actions, putting Brian Brooks in that position, I believe, and Brian Brooks putting forth a policy saying, look, we're making it our policy that we are going to treat everybody equally and just follow the law, right? If Congress passes legislation and says this is legal, then we will follow the law. But aside from that, we're not going to put our own political preferences and personal preferences to attack companies we don't like and do all this stuff behind the scenes that is unconstitutional.
Yes, and I mean, like, this is very interesting because these are things that don't have enough press coverage.
There's no coverage on this. Next to only people in the industry like myself who are dealing with this know about it, right?
Right, exactly. And these are the things that we need to prevent and need more awareness about it, because if tomorrow the financial system becomes a political tool, not a tool to do transmission between creditors and savers, not a tool to identify good investment opportunities, but a tool to prosecute people, a tool that excludes financially millions of people, then market economy cannot work and cannot function in that way. And if it's abuses, like, for example, these kind of examples that you're mentioning, or if it's just misconducts, or if it's just misuses of regulation against innovators or against people who are doing more risky businesses, that's also bad, because what we see in Europe, and the reason that Europe has way lower wages, way more of unemployment, way more economic problems, is because they have this mentality that they need to regulate everything that seems a bit risky.
Yeah.
So the American was built from the opposite perspective. Yeah. If you're a risk taker, go for it. You have limited liability.
Absolutely.
You need to go for it. Yeah. You need to innovate. You need to create new businesses. This is something that, for example, Trump is also correct when he went to the Bitcoin conference a couple of weeks ago. And he said, look, if we're going to have Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, let's have it here in the US.
Absolutely.
Let's not give away these businesses to the Chinese, for example. Let's have it here in the US. Let's be at the forefront of technology. And he's correct.
He's 100% correct.
And when I talk to the people, both Democrats and Republicans, especially when Democrats have a way more hostile view of, for example,
things have really changed over the past 10 years, right? Because it was the opposite way. The people that were Democrats that I remember growing up, it was like it was like the anti-war party, the pro-innovation. It was more pro-innovation, more pro-freedom. But we've really seen like a total switch here. And it seems, at least my personal opinion now is, the Democratic Party is almost on the wrong side of all these issues, whether it's economic freedom, personal freedom, freedom of speech, anti-censorship. I mean, war, going to wars, getting involved in all these wars and doing all these things. I mean, the script has flipped like completely. Like the Republican Party of like 10 to 20 years ago is like now what the Democratic Party was almost, right? At that time. And the Democratic Party has gone really socialist and very authoritarian, right? It's really authoritarian because there's people on the left and the right that I agree with on a lot of different things. It's like you're either like authoritarian or totalitarian, or you're not, right? It's like, but you can be more liberal minded or more conservative minded, but still believe in, certain ideals, right?
I mean, in my case, when I talk to people that are a bit center left, center right, progressive, conservative, to me, the real test is whether these people are or not authoritarian.
Exactly.
If you believe in personal freedom, if you believe in the rule of law, if you believe in the political process that one person, one vote, whoever decides the majority, you can do with certain limitations of the rule of law, then differences between center left, center right becomes way less important. But what we need to be really against is people who they don't believe in check and balances to government, so they can do arbitrary decisions. people who pursue wars without no accountability, people that are having bad foreign policy. Because if we see right now, Venezuela was bad foreign policy from the US. The Middle East is in a difficult situation. Ukraine is in a difficult situation. You have wars in Yemen. Like you have all these bad...
Syria, all these different things, you know.
It's just bad foreign policy.
Terrible. Yeah,
terrible.
Terrible. I think Trump really, you know, the system hated him so much for it, but I think he totally shifted the narrative that like all these experts and people probably getting paid off by lobbyists and all these different things, they're the experts in foreign policy. And Trump kind of came in and really reset the script on a lot of that stuff, you know, was willing to talk to anybody, was willing to negotiate. And I think the world needs more thinkers like that, right? He might not be right on everything, but, you know, at least he was ready to shake up the status quo instead of, you know, giving all this money to and weapons and et cetera to, you know, rebels in Syria that we turn around and it's like, we're funding all these rebel groups. I think this was during the Obama administration. It's like you funded all these rebel groups that like were against Assad because of his abuses. But then, you know, we got ISIS formed out of that, right? It's like ISIS now has all those weapons and all those things that we funded. And look what they did. They established their caliphate, murdered countless people. It's like, you know, my personal opinion is, you know, we shouldn't be involving ourselves trying to play God in all these different conflicts and stuff over the world, right? You know, let's give food and, you know, basic goods to people and try to help and leave it at that. I hate to say it, but like, you can't be involved in every little war zone, every little war, every little conflict. Like, you know, the United States, like we were formed from a civil war and, you know, it was terrible things happened, but look at the nation look where we're at today, right? And sometimes in those places, like you just got to let it play out. You can't be God because when you try to do something, it's like, you don't really know what's going to happen if you give weapons to this group, right? Like, do we really know what's going to happen? Like, what if they lose? Well, who gets those weapons? I mean, it's like, you can't predict everything. You know, you can't like model out this stuff. And a lot of times it ends up being worse than what would have actually occurred.
Yes.
We saw this with Iran. Like we didn't like the Shah of Iran. So we got involved there and supported these people. And it's like, now look at the regime there. It's way worse for relations with us. Right. So stay out of it. That's my opinion, right? You know, focus America's tax revenue and tax dollars here at home and with the people that are paying those dollars. You know, we've got all this. I read something, report the other day was like the Taliban were able to apply for $300 million of grants or something. So, you know, what government politicians are going to be arrested for that, right? Because if you sent $10 to somebody in Iran or whatever, you would be investigated by every single agency that exists. Yet our tax dollars are funding the Taliban directly. You know what I mean? It's like, it's unfathomable to even think about. There's really no accountability. I know I'm going on all these different tangents and rabbit holes.
No, but you are right. Because look, if something doesn't work for 20 years or 30 years, you need to, at one point, you need to sit down and think, okay, what are we doing wrong? And sadly, the Western world, I would say the US, Europe, there is something fundamentally wrong about the way they're promoting democracy. Mm-hmm. When was the last time that the US was able to actually encourage democracy promotion in a correct way from authoritarianism? When was the last time that protesters were able to actually take control of government from a very authoritarian place? And we need to think about new ways to support people, protect people. And as you mentioned, you cannot be involved everywhere. You need to identify where is your strategic interest. You need to see that, for example, countries like Venezuela closer to your border is one thing. Another very different things to go to countries in the Middle East or in Africa without also Western values with many differences.
Cultural differences. I mean, there's so many differences. It's like the amounts of trillions of dollars that have just been taxpayer money that could have, you know, revitalized infrastructure here in the United States and created social safety nets or whatever for people, helping the elderly pop, whatever it may be, could have been, you know, all that money would have been better spent here. And there, it's like, it was total waste of everything, death, destruction, problems. And here we are 20 years later, no better result. We've got Iran about to be at war with, you know, Israel. We've got, you know, firing rockets. I mean, there's just crazy chaos. I mean, chaos. Listen, trade, be nice and friendly, and stay the fuck out of it. That's my opinion.
And for example, we need to think about also new ways to support people. We were talking before air about how Twitter, X now, was shut down in Venezuela. for 10 days. So Maduro took the decision to eliminate X from Venezuela. Why do Western democracies and the US find a way that this doesn't happen in the future? Protecting the universal access to freedom technologies, to information. This is something that I'm sure everybody will get behind. This is something that I'm sure will not lead to also other more risky attempts to promote democracy. But coming back to also your question about Democrats, Republicans, what I want and what I would like to see politicians is just to protect freedom, rule of law, peace, family. This is also something that I don't understand, why there is such this negativity about having a family, having a house, having a good career. We need to allow people who want to prosper in life, to develop a good life. We need to encourage them. We need to help them. What should be the focus of politicians? How many young people can buy a house? How many young people can access a good career and a good job? How many young people are thinking about having babies? Why? Because the economic conditions are so harsh, are so difficult. So that's something that all politicians should be talking about. Second thing, the problem with homelessness is inconceivable. Why it's going on? Why this is happening? What underlying social and economic aspects are leading to these things? And as you mentioned, like they used to be, if people believe in peace, rule of law, they may believe a bit more on social safety net, which makes them center left. They believe more in a progressive taxation, if they believe in more welfare, if they believe in a more public education. But these people are fundamentally people that you can talk to because you can reach agreements, you can reach consensus. My fear is the spread of these radical ideas that if you don't agree with me, you're an enemy of a state.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You are somebody who is just a fundamentally bad person. Also, this radicalization in the adjectives people took to each other. Like, if you don't believe in what I believe, then it's because you are racist, or it's because you are a horrible, without empathy human being. That's not the way of treating each other. So I think coming back to civility can avoid situations like the one we saw in which one former president was being shot. When I saw that, to me was so shocking, so moving, because this is something that we see in Latin America frequently. Presidents being shot, candidates being shot, but not in the US. It shouldn't happen.
It happens very rarely. Yeah, I mean, you can count on your hands, throughout the United States history, how many presidents have been, attempted assassination or assassinated. Right? Very, again, obviously, when you're the guy, I mean, you're at risk, of course, right? But for the most part, most presidents have been fine. But again, this goes back again to the media, right? Like they're literally comparing this person to Adolf Hitler. Someone who genocided millions of people. Whatever you think about Trump, he says some mean things. He posts some mean tweets. He might piss certain people off. Some people might not like his style. The guy's pretty much a comedian who ran a TV show. I mean, there's this sense of humor. He embellishes. They don't like that. Okay, that's fine, but the guy's not Adolf Hitler. He didn't kill millions of people. You know what I mean? It's like ridiculous to even have that comparison. And it's disrespectful to all of the people who have been influenced, who have family members who were lost and died, et cetera, in the Holocaust, right? It's like you're comparing somebody to Adolf Hitler, right? So it's no wonder that, people want to kill him or whatever when the media is pushing that message, right?
Yes, and something that
goes back to your point of civility, right?
Yes, and something that I want to say in your podcast to everybody who's listening to us is that if you are on the left of the spectrum, then don't compare Trump with Hitler.
Yeah,
that's not true.
Yeah,
that's not accurate. And if you're on the right, don't compare also Obama with Maduro or Chavez, because it's also not true. What we need to is to identify specifically what these people do that you disagree with, explain, have arguments, have policy recommendations, and then reach, again, feasible solutions to these issues. So if we come back to this kind of civil society, we can make good policies out of that.
You've advocated for a right to banking for immigrants and human rights defenders. Can you explain why this is crucial and obstacles these groups face? And then let's tie it into Bitcoin a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin. Where do you see Bitcoin? How did you discover Bitcoin? And how does it play into all this?
Okay, so I will begin with the Bitcoin question, for example. So since I finance activists in Venezuela and in other places, I have an activist network in Venezuela, Middle East, Africa, in places where financial system doesn't work. In places in which you cannot have a bank account because you will be victim of surveillance, or it will be weaponized against you. People like me, I cannot have a bank account in Venezuela. So out of necessity, I found Bitcoin. I found Bitcoin as the way for me to help and support these people in a private way, in an efficient way. And when I saw that I had to understand about this technology, I started, as people say, in the rabbit hole. Try to understand how can I use it, how can I use it effectively, how do I self-wallet, how do I do these different mechanisms, and also teaching people, because you need to teach activists. And in my case, mostly my activists are young activists, university students or recent graduates, explaining to them how you open a wallet, how do you do peer-to-peer. So since then, I became a huge advocate for Bitcoin as a tool for freedom, as a freedom technology. Because I saw that if people don't have financial tools, if people don't have financial freedom, you cannot have any kind of political freedom.
Yeah, I mean, it's, money is like a form of speech. It's like, so it's a fundamental human right, I guess, to be able to have the freedom to transact, essentially.
Yes. And so the more I began talking about these things, I also realized that there are many people in exile, activists, who are not able to open a bank account because they're victim of misinformation, because they are victim by many attacks from regimes, and they themselves, they can be living in Washington, they can be living in Europe. I even know former presidential candidates that in authoritarian countries that cannot open a bank account in Washington. So I realized, okay, this is an issue that is also happening outside authoritarian states. I remember sending a message to my activists to fill out a form if this was happening to them. And I received answers in over 60 countries of activists who the bank accounts have been weaponized.
Yeah,
or compromised.
It's a constant thing that occurs. I mean, it's, even again, our industry, right? We're not political activists in that sense, right? I mean, we are in a way promoting a new technology that's disruptive and that includes people and brings in people and allows access to everybody. So, maybe we are activists, I guess, in our own way, but we want to move progress forward, move humanity forward, right? So, interesting.
Yes. So then I became more and more involved with the community. I believe that we need to protect these rights. Many people in the Bitcoin world, because they're not connected with the political world, they don't see the value on doing advocacy to protect Bitcoin. Also in democracies, which is also something that we can talk to about, because there are attempts against Bitcoin as a freedom technology coming from the US as well and other countries. So I started advocating for this. I then realized that this issue of people not being able to open to bank account, and just really quick, why they cannot open a bank account? Because they cannot meet all these compliance requirements.
Yeah.
They cannot meet all these KYC requirements, know your customer requirements, because they come from, again, difficult places.
Yeah, I mean, half the world, doesn't I think it's like over 3 billion people on the planet. I've said this a couple of times, don't have access to banking infrastructure. They don't have, half of them come from war-torn regions or hyperinflating areas, or, don't even have IDs. There's no government infrastructure to even create IDs. So, the current system just doesn't work for over half the world, right? There's just no way to even make it work, right? Because it's just not,
it's even more. Because what I do is that I get expert testimonies. So in my organization, we bring experts. So they give us their insights on these issues. We have interviewed people like the former central bank governor of Ecuador. What she told me is that, Jorge, technically 60% of all people in Ecuador have a bank account. However, when you see how many people actually can use it on a regular basis, it's only 12% population. Why? Because many of them, even though they have a bank account, they need to fill paperwork that they cannot, so the bank account is frozen. Or they live in areas in which they don't have even signal connection to even use bank account. Like everybody doesn't use it. So we live in a world in which majority of people don't have a bank account or cannot have actual usage of this bank account. And then in democracies, in developed countries, I saw how many immigrants were not able to even open a bank account. And we're not talking about refugees or in asylum. We're talking to immigrants that even have dual nationality, immigrants with job offers, people that were, let's say, Spaniard and Venezuelans. They have dual nationality. They were not able to open bank accounts. Why? Because they were coming from a territory considered as high risk, like Venezuela. So when they come from these territories, banks have to do all this compliance, regulation, paperwork. So
and a lot of it doesn't work anyway. I mean, I was talking to Luda about this. The whole KYC AML thing is a big scam. 99% of all the criminal activity still gets through anyway. They only catch 1%. All this stuff just to catch 1%. Are you kidding me? The amount of people you're hurting, the amount of families you're preventing from access to to have financial inclusion. I mean, it's an absolute joke. It's disgusting, in my opinion. So, and again, all this data they're collecting, they can't even keep the data safe. It's, stolen by hackers, criminals, sold on the dark net, etc. And there's no penalties for that. They just, they have to send out a letter. I get these letters like, sorry, we were breached. All of your personal data, your social security, everything is at risk because we were incompetent and we took all your information. And now, how many scams and crimes are committed just by people from that data leak? I mean, so many crimes are committed through that. People stealing and, doing all sorts of embezzlement activities and creating fake, destroying people's credit. I mean, all these different things, right? So all the AML, KYC, regime does is abuse people's privacy, and it actually from the data that I've looked at, it would be one thing if it was effective. It would be one thing if they were catching 90% of all the criminal activity. Then they can make the argument like, okay, we know we're violating your privacy. We know we're doing all this, but it's actually working, right? But they can't even make that argument because 99% of the crime still occurs. So it's like, what are we doing this for? Why are you creating these why are you creating these regulations that are creating these honeypots with incompetent, companies who can't keep the data safe? They got to collect all this data, and then it gets constantly stolen, and you're putting people at risk, and you're discluding you're preventing, over half the planet from participating in the economy of the world, right? I mean, it's terrible.
Yes, because if you're a Venezuelan who is moving to Spain, you want to have a job and you want to start a new life, and you are optimistic about it. And then when you try to open a bank account, you cannot even do that because of AML and KYC. And then at the same time, you go through the best street in Madrid and you see that Venezuelans who are highly connected with the regime are buying all the apartments, all the nice apartments, all the nice houses. Then that's the best illustration of the failure of anti-money laundering regulations and anti-corruption initiatives. Because
you're not gonna prevent those people who are well connected from getting around your little system.
They have amazing lawyers.
I mean, the whole thing is a scam. It's just nonsense. It needs to go away.
And coming back to what the dangers of data, something that people, when I talk to Americans, something that they really freak out, and is that many don't understand that their banking data is very easy to access anywhere in the world. So for the people listening to, if you have a bank account, thanks to these regulations, any country in the world can access to your banking data, and any individual that has access to these instruments can check where do you get your coffee, how much money you have, who do you send money. They can literally see inside your life.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable because people will think that you have more protections. People will think that maybe my bank sees
We're supposed to have these protections, right? Our Constitution protects these things. It's unreasonable searches and seizures. We have a Constitution in place. The problem is it's being violated.
Right.
It's not being, our basic constitutional freedoms are not being protected. They're being violated by the government itself that's supposed to protect them.
And that's exactly, it's super dangerous because all these regulations, because they get you under, again, money laundering kind of arguments, they then override many constitutional protections people have. So under money laundering claims, people could be detained, have pre-trial detentions. They can freeze your bank account just with allegations. They can access your banking data. They can do international lawfare against you without any kind of, that you will not be able to do it any other way. Like you will not, and for example, if you go to the Nicaragua case, how the Nicaraguan regime attacks their dissidents is all through anti-money laundering claims, even the church. So the church, when they put in prison all these members of the church, they did it because they were quote unquote money laundering.
It's unbelievable.
So you have these things. And the funny thing,
they're not protecting anybody. These things are just authoritarian tools. I mean, that's really all it is. I mean, you know,
sadly, it's financial surveillance the way we see now, and it's again massively excluding people because if you have millions of people who cannot access the financial system because of these regulations. Also, let's take the political thing aside. The other day, I wrote a paper about the economic consequences of all this. If you're a small or medium-sized company trying to do business between the US and an emerging market, you cannot bear all this paperwork.
Yeah, it's impossible.
It's impossible because it's too risky. So then you have a market inefficiency there. You have more market concentration. One thing. Second thing, if you are a bank who is generally interested in opening branches in Latin America to have more financial inclusion, you cannot do so either because it's so expensive and so risky that the number of corresponding banking has been going down for over a decade. So in the last decade, we have lost 20% of all the corresponding banking. So you have that problem too. You have the problem that, again, financial inclusion of immigration. You have the highest level of compliance mechanisms. So you have all these instruments that what do is that they take away economic productivity, they take away prosperity opportunities, and ultimately they lead to market concentration.
Us Austrian economics would call this a blatant destruction of spontaneous order. Yes. I don't know what kind of economic principle you subscribe to, but myself, I'm mostly an Austrian economist.
I have read many of the Austrian things. I'm a huge reader of Hayek.
Hayek is fantastic. Yeah, spontaneous order.
Yes. And again, like every...
Mises and Hayek.
Exactly. And every time I see, I mean, like all economists, I think they should read Bastiat, for example. They need to see the unintended consequences of economic policies. What he used to say, the seen and the unseen result of policies. So all this extremely good.
What you're describing right now is exactly the unseen. So instead of protecting people and doing all these things and stopping crime, it's having the complete opposite effect.
Exactly. It's completely the opposite effect.
Yeah.
And I do believe that people who believe in Austrian economics, they are correct also in the sense that ultimately governments don't have all the information available.
They don't.
For them to make decisions on the economy.
Yeah. It's impossible because people's preferences change on a daily basis. You know, I might like pistachios today and walnuts tomorrow, right? You know, nobody knows my business. I mean, it's impossible, right? But obviously we can see that play out, right? With these top-down trying to control every aspect of the economy. Look at Venezuela. Look at all these failures of economy. Look at the Soviet Union. Look at all these different things that this experiment has been played out over and over again, and it's failed every single time, right? So,
yes, and again, and this I don't know how much have you read also about public choice theory, like James Buchanan, Gordon Tullock. Have you read them? These economists also.
No, but educate me.
Right. So they are not Austrians, but they are the ones who develop all this theory about rent seeking and all this theory that.
What school do they subscribe to?
They're called the School of Virginia. So the Virginia School, or they are called also public choice theorists.
Okay.
So what is interesting about these people is that they say, look, in theory, all nice to have a government that can distribute or do industrial policy or incentivize specific markets. But the problem is that politicians are human beings.
Of course.
Subject to incentive, subject to corruption. So in reality, what happens is that you have interest groups taking away parts of government, using money from government to stimulate their own economies. So you need to always have this kind of framework. So they're also really interesting.
Are you following what's happening in, I think it's Argentina right now? Because Milei just totally axed the whole thing with all this rent seeking. Literally talking about rents, right? So now it's opened up, and I read something the other day that rents have dropped by I want to say 15 to 40%. So now there's more inventory available and rents have come down for people. I mean, that's just a blatant example in real time of what you're describing, I feel like.
It's extremely interesting. I have been following the Argentinian case. His inflation is going down. So that's, again, huge by itself.
Yeah.
Inflation is going down. I know that he has also massive political opposition. But at the same time, people are so tired of socialism.
Yeah.
Argentina used to be a prosperous nation. Argentina, for the past 20 years, have been on the decline, deep decline, in which people are just tired.
Argentinians are a proud people. I mean, this has been a great couple of years for them, right? They won the World Cup.
Yeah.
Now they turn around and they got Milei and things are changing.
Yeah, they have the Pope. They
got the Pope. I'm super happy for him,
Right. Yeah. No.
I'm proud of him.
Look, me too. Like Argentinians, just to, for example, tell you, like Argentinians have been so nice to Venezuelans. Because 8 million people have left my country, and most of them go to Latin America. And in some countries, as it is normal, local population tend to resent when they have huge influx of immigrants. This has been the case in Chile. This has been the case in Peru, in which immigrants are not treated the best way possible. They think that they will take away jobs from them, etc.
I think that, you know what? I'm going to comment on this real quick, because if you look at the early history of the United States, even with people coming legally through Ellis Island, this has kind of always been the case, right? It's like, it's just natural, right? And it's kind of like, when you join it, like you experience this on a level of like, if you join a new team, right? Like you get bullied a little bit. It's just kind of like, he's the new guy, right? The new guy's around. And my personal opinion is like, I have no problem with, the system here in the United States, and we need to reform the legal avenue of immigration, but I know so many people that like have family, like even people that work for me, they have family members that are like in Israel or over here, and like they've done everything right. They're waiting in the queue. They've filed all the paperwork, and like the good people, they want to come over. It's like, and then at the same time, we've got millions of people just being imported, right? Across the border, no checks, no nothing, just, totally illegal, supported by different NGOs or whatever it may be. That is government money funding these NGOs. It's like, people's resentment is understandable, at least in my opinion.
No, look, I
don't blame the immigrants themselves. I mean, if it was me, I would come too.
Right, exactly. No, we need to look, the reform of the immigration system here is something that
needs to happen.
I really hope they tackle it. Because the amount of people like even myself, who would like to be here, but through the legal system, it's just too difficult.
It's too difficult, yeah.
I went to university here. So I went to university here in Florida. I did a program at Stanford. I have done things at Harvard. I had a ton of education.
I can see that by talking to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So I have learned more outside the classroom, but that's
same here. I mean, it's like, they don't teach you Austrian economics at school. There's, they don't like the fact that, the money itself is a natural good in an economy. They like to have communist. It's like, for all the things that America's done right, it's like the one most important good in an economy, that good needs to be centrally planned and controlled. But all the other goods,
Yeah.
you hear a little bit about the Chicago School of Economics. You learn more about that, because that's like, that's acceptable. That's okay. Because the one thing that they don't say needs to be a free market is money.
Yes.
Everything else is a free market, but when it comes to money, they need to have that centralized control.
Yeah. Chicago is also extremely interesting. I know that it was Milton Friedman's birthday, like a week ago or something like that. And I was just rewatching an old interview that he got. I don't know if you have seen this podcast called Uncommon Knowledge.
Uncommon Knowledge. I feel like I have.
So it's this guy called Peter Robinson. He's a professor at the Hoover Institution, which is the place that I studied for a summer at Stanford. And he was a speechwriter for Reagan. So imagine all the stories he had. He's the guy who wrote the speech of Tear Down the Wall. So he has a full podcast. Reagan sent him 1 month to Berlin before this speech to get an air of...
To get a feel of the population and see what's happening.
He wrote, and it, of course, I'm just going to the tangent, but he wrote the speech. And he put the part of Gorbachev, tear down this wall. He said that all advisors told him to take it out.
Don't do it. Yeah.
Don't do it.
It's like one of the most popular speeches of all time.
Yeah, they take it out. So the guy was super nervous. And he said, okay, I'm going to go to Reagan himself. And when you're a speech writer, you don't want to go to the president.
Yeah.
He said, no, but they really have to. he went to Reagan, and Reagan said, "Yeah, let's do it."
What a cool story.
Yes. But then coming back, so I rewatched an interview that he made with Peter Robinson with Milton Friedman.
So is this from the podcast or the thing you mentioned?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So the same guy.
It's like nobody knows this. Yeah.
No, nobody knows this. I started watching this podcast back when I was in Venezuela. It's like 15 years ago, 14 years old, because I remember I just wanted to learn more about economics. So he was interviewing Friedman, he interviewed Becker, he interviewed Stigler, all these like big Chicago economists. So with Friedman, like, again, like he believes in free market, he believes in capitalism. When they interview Becker, he talks about how you need to make laws in a way that is economically makes sense for people. Otherwise, they will just break the law.
Of course.
And at the same time, when they think about how you need to allow firms to discover prices, how you need to allow firms to reach business opportunities by themselves, none of these things can government do. There is also a great economist from New York called Israel Kishner as well. He says that you need to allow entrepreneurs to create path forward to the future. And again, like, this is just the right way of looking at economics. And the more that we forget these things, the more that we think that government can lead these processes. Just to give you an example, the other day in Europe, there's a big push towards achieving what they call more productivity. Why? Because there is no productivity growth in Europe. If you see in Western countries, it's just 0% productivity growth.
Yeah.
And in the long run, productivity growth converges with economic growth. So if you don't have a productivity growth, no chance. So they're thinking in Europe, okay, how can we achieve economic growth? And if you see the plans of the European Commission, they say, we will sponsor researchers to do research on which new companies can be created. And we will bring experts to write. And I'm thinking, this is just the wrong way.
Yeah.
Nobody who has ever created businesses, or in my case, which is an NGO, doesn't work this way.
Yeah.
You need to have freedom, you need to have motivation, and you need to have an environment that pushes us to discover opportunities.
Yeah.
Even in my own organization, the Economic Inclusion Group, at the first time, it's just an idea. It's just an idea. Okay, I want to do this. In my case, I want to protect people who are being unbanked. I want to protect people who have no chance to be economically included. But then you need to start testing. You see which programs I can launch, how I can build partnership. And that's the way. No regulator can tell me how to do my business. So it's just this perspective of the economics that we need to return. And as you mentioned, in universities, even in economics, I study economics. Sometimes we forget these things because we are taught economics in such a mathematical way, and in such an idealistic way sometimes. Yeah. For example, there's the whole movement towards industrial policy. The basic concept is that you need to incentivize certain markets or certain sectors. So you need to have preferential subsidies, preferential tariff, preferential taxes to certain industries that you want to develop. That sounds amazing, no? Like, okay, this is an industries that we want to move forward.
It sounds good in theory.
Exactly. But in reality, what happens is that you don't develop policies to increase productivity of companies. You develop policy to increase the profitability of certain sectors, which is completely different. Yeah. So that's what ends up happening, will lead to corruption and, again, economic stagnation and more taxes for the other people. So that's a problem.
Yeah, I spoke to somebody about that with solar panels in Canada, or I think it was solar energy in Canada from like the past 10, like I think it was like 10, 20 years ago or whatever. They were really, but it was just like government incentivizing this and taking tax dollars, and like it ended up, people suffered because they had to pay higher rates essentially, because that technology at the time wasn't quite ready for prime time. It was so costly, right? But if you let the economy work, as these technologies get better, as solar panels, as green energy gets more efficient, the cost will naturally come down, and then it will make sense to do, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think about that a lot, like, because it does sound good in theory. Like, we should incentivize these companies. Like, coming from, my field, it's like, I don't even need incentive. I just want to be left alone. I don't want to be attacked. That's it. Just right. Let us do our thing. Just let us protect our right to operate as a business, right? Or to, participate and push forward the space and technology and create more jobs and create more opportunities. The only time I really think government incentives are good, and we're going down economic rabbit holes now, but for industries that matter for national security, like okay, incentivize those things, right? Because you don't want to be like the U.S. right now is like everything is made in China, like we're and they're depending on us too because we're sending them the money, whatever. But if there are certain things that we would need in a war or to protect our national security, like okay, use subsidies to incentivize a certain level of that to protect yourself, whether it's farming or whatever, to have food, to have shells and bullets, whatever it may be, whatever that strategic thing is for national security. Like, okay, but, trying to do all this other stuff is just, it affects, again, like I said, the Austrian school of thought is it affects spontaneous order, right?
Yes, you need to, and you are right on this. And what has been interesting to me is to see how things that we need to actually stimulate are the ones that are not being stimulated. For example, what is in the national security or national interest of the US and in the world? Have autonomy in your energy suppliers. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Europe and in Germany, for example, their energy supplier has been Russia all this time.
Yeah, I mean, Trump went over there and told them that, and they laughed in his face like 4 or 5 years ago.
Right, exactly. And
6 years ago.
Look what happened.
Look what happened, yeah.
That's one thing. That's national security 101. In the case of nuclear reactors, for instance, in the case of nuclear power, there is a huge national security issue, which is that 70% of the uranium is controlled by Russia, either in Russia or in Central Asia through their proxies. So if you really want to develop this energy, then you need to find alternative sources. Venezuela is one of them. So these specific issues are important. Another national security thing. I would like to have the smartest people, the most bright people to come to my country. So if I were somebody in politics, in government, I will have special visas for people who are...
It just makes sense. I mean, this was... Trump was on the All In Pod with... I don't know if you're familiar with the All In podcast, but it's a group of VCs in Silicon Valley. It was maybe a month ago. They were talking about this exact issue, right?
All In podcast.
Yeah, it's a great podcast. It's part of my weekly listen.
And they were talking about this.
They had Trump on as a guest, and they were talking specifically about this. Like, hey, we need to have a special visa process for the most talented people in the world. They should, obviously that's what we want, right?
Yes, I will say anybody who has a college degree, everybody who has a PhD is a national interest.
Of course. Yeah, hands down. Right.
You want these people. You want people like Elon Musk.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so that's one thing. Again, supply chains and also monetary stability. Like, what is the way countries are broken? Through financial ways. So if any country has had their monetary stability in check, their foreign debt in check, so there are all these geoeconomic aspects of it. And so, yeah, I agree with you. But in general, free markets is the way to go because the more wealth you have, the best businesses you have,
of course,
the more innovation you have,
the more tax revenue you have, the more productivity you have. It's a no-brainer, right?
Yes.
Sadly, that's just there's too many people think emotionally and not logically.
Exactly.
It's a sad thing, right? Especially when your decisions have consequences for people, right? And look at what socialism and communism has done. It's been an absolute disaster.
Yes. Disaster. And we can talk about statistics all day. We can talk about 90% of poverty, 8 million people left the country, but all these people are a story, a life. All these people is a life of family who has been broken.
Yeah.
For the people listening, like imagine that you are a 25-year-old in Venezuela and you see yourself and you have your mother working as a bartender in Chile, your father in construction in the US. You're in Venezuela, maybe being raised by your grandmother. Or your friends left. You cannot go to university because universities are closed and are indoctrination centers. And you see that your only best perspective in life is to make, $200 per month. You know that you will not be able to have a family. You know that you will not be able to have a children. That's such a dystopian world. That's so horrible. Like, people need to understand how level of evil these people are because they destroy the life of millions of people.
Yeah.
And today is Venezuela, but before was Cuba. It's Nicaragua. It's many
Cuba. Cuba's another one. I heard a story. I was listening to, I think, a podcast or something, and I heard a story about like, do you know what the number one career is in Cuba? Like the most desired career
Is a sport person or no, like athlete?
like for the average person though, like, you know, if you have a daughter or something, like, do you know,
Okay,
like,
no. Part of regime or what?
what did you say?
Part of the regime or no?
Yeah, that's the number one. But I heard something so disturbing that like just, you know, it made me almost want to cry. It was like parents of children who like have daughters there, like, you know, they push them not to be a doctor, not to be a lawyer, but like to be a prostitute. Like that is the number one paying career in Cuba right now if you are a woman. Like how fucking disgusting and disturbing is that? Like imagine telling your daughter, like, you know, go hang out by the airport when tourists come, like your best chance is to be a prostitute. That's
destruction of life. No?
I mean, think about the market signals, how distorted they are and how destructive, you know, when you destroy the money of a country and you have, you know, communism, socialism. I mean, that is like, that's unfathomable.
It's horrible. And just to look at the way the worst thing about communism is that it really destroys your sense of human being.
Yeah. Yeah.
It brings your dignity down.
Mm-hmm.
It really pushes you to a point in which you believe that you don't have any self-worth. Stories like that one is just heartbreaking. And we see it in all these countries that are communist. Wow.
You've emphasized the importance of working with developers to create tools that overcome censorship. What types of technologies or applications do you think are most promising in this regard? We've talked a little bit about Bitcoin. Is there any other tech that you are really excited about?
This is really interesting because I have been advocating, and in fact, this morning I wrote an article that will be published by the Human Rights Foundation on the issue of tech-based strategy against authoritarianism. If we are not at the cutting edge of technology, we have no chance to defeat these regimes. And Bitcoin is one part of it, but there is more to this. We just talked about before about how can we make a system or how can we create tools that guarantee that everybody can have access to X or to Signal or to Telegram without being able, the regimes, to destroy this opportunity.
Yeah.
That's one thing that, of course, has much more of a government policymaking focus, right? How can we have these global technologies that guarantee this access to information, communication, and privacy tools and payment methods? At the same time, with developers, the tools that they can give us are the only weapons we have. For example, we need to have payment mechanisms like Bitcoin, for example. We need to have communication mechanisms, mass communication that cannot be altered by an algorithm or cannot be also attacked by regimes. We need to have also ways that we can do the same way that there is a Google Docs, open source, protected.
Yeah.
So nobody can do surveillance, Google Docs.
Which is exactly what Google's doing. They're reading everything you write.
Right.
You know,
communication.
invading your privacy. Just
encrypted communication. You mentioned at the beginning of the show that you can connect me with somebody who can help me make more protected my website.
Oh, yeah.
Because the thing is that for people like me who are in these kind of difficult environments, it becomes so expensive to even have a website.
Yeah.
Why? Because if you have a normal website of a restaurant in Miami, who's going to attack you? So you just buy it. You go to GoDaddy, you buy it, you get a template, you do it. If you are like me, you have every day or every week or every month somebody trying to shut you down. So if you go to traditional routes, it's extremely expensive. And we are ultimately like young people trying to create something, so we don't have the means to do so. But if developers find ways to protect us in a way that is not as much cost difficult for us, those are tools that we have to protect ourselves, to finance activists. So that's, again, like, let's find ways that everybody have access to these tools. Let's find ways that regimes are not able to undermine these tools. Let's work together also so that developers can help us teach many people about this. Young people, immigrants, activists, how to use these tools. And at the same, and I can make all these prescriptive notions of what this will result. But I think the beauty of this strategy is that if you create a decentralized hubs, decentralized network of spaces of communication between activists and developers, and let's add policymakers also. If you create these hubs, I'm sure many ideas that I don't even have in my head will result from that, which is, again, a very Austrian kind of mindset to have, because we don't know what specific needs people have in specific places or circumstances.
Yeah.
But I'm sure this will develop. An idea that we have with Ludmila, and we are working on it, is that we're going to create in Brussels what we call a Freedom Tech Embassy. I don't know if she mentioned it.
She did. I told her she can make one here if she wants. You have full access to my offices and whatever I have here in the US. So
amazing. Thank you. We appreciate it. Because we'll put together this, because we need to create these places. And in Europe, sadly, there is no place to talk to policymakers about this issue. In Brussels, that is the second capital of the democratic world after Washington, there is no place that we can invite, again, policymakers and developers to talk to each other. So we have this idea of creating this space. And the idea that this space also coordinate meetups in Europe, in different capitals, that we have special ambassadors in all countries to defend our technology, because that's the vision that we have. And we appreciate that you will be one of the ambassadors then here in the US. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Help you guys in any way I can.
Because imagine the different, I don't come from a developer kind of background. I don't know about computer science. I'm just an economist, as you see. And
I can see, yeah. I'm impressed.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So when I talk to developers, and I have been to all these Bitcoin conferences because I was a speaker. So I was from, BTC Prague. I went to Nashville a couple of weeks ago. I go a lot to mining conference because I'm also fascinated about mining.
Well, we can talk for another 4 hours if you want, because that's my background.
Exactly. Look, really quick then, as an economist, Bitcoin mining is one of the few almost perfectly competitive markets out there. Have you thought about it?
Oh, yeah.
We have the hash rate.
Satoshi designed everything,
beautiful.
very beautifully. Yeah. The incentive structure, the game theory, the cost of production, mimicking gold. I mean, there's so many facets, and maybe we could spend an hour talking about each one.
Look, when I talk to policymakers about Bitcoin mining, and I do because that's one of the main attacks against Bitcoin, is they say, okay, this is nice, but it's bad for the environment. I tell them, look, let's think about it. Bitcoin mining, first of all, they need to use residual energy. They need to find the cheapest cost of energy to be profitable. They are also very good for grid stabilization, which is what you guys want.
We can talk about this for hundreds of hours.
Right. And at the same time, they produce a ton of heat.
I mean, we do. I mean, it's like, we're one of the only industries that exists that the electric company can call, and they did this a week ago to one of my sites, megawatts of power. We're talking that will power a city, right? Like, they call us up and say, hey, we got an emergency. We need you to shut down for 6 hours, to stabilize the grid. Sure, no problem. We press a couple buttons on the computer. Everything shuts down. 6 hours later, when they need us back to generate revenue for them, we turn back on. There's not a better setup that exists, right?
It's just beautiful. There is no fixed cost doing this.
Yeah, I mean, they give us a little discount, and we're happy to help them in any way, and it benefits both parties because the average person is not using energy 24/7, right? We're the best customer you could possibly ask for, right? Like, we're going to pay you 24/7, unlike anybody else, give you that consistent income stream, and then when you need us to help with grid stabilization, we're a great tool. You can have hundreds of megawatts in your back pocket or gigawatts or whatever, where you can just shut off if you need to because a hospital needs power, or there's an emergency over here, or something hit a transformer and a truck blew up, and now none of these homes have power. Okay, we can shut it off and help you guys in any way, right? I mean, we could honestly talk about this for hours.
Beautiful.
We'll have to have another conversation talking about the economics of all this, but
really quick, is so beautiful because if they really want the electrification of industry, if they really want, policymakers, if they really want this transition towards, again,
green energy, you will have all these excess resources.
Yeah.
Who's going to consume, hundreds of megawatts of wind energy when at 3 o'clock in the morning when everybody's sleeping, right? How are you going to monetize that? How are you going to expand your build? How are you going to, ROI your first project so you can do the second project?
And second, and the other thing about national security, because I know many people who watch me are people who are more interested in economics or in politics, about national security, artificial intelligence database. That's coming. 60% of more energy demand will come from these things. The way to also be profitable in this area is to have also Bitcoin mining.
Yeah.
That's what and of course you correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the path.
I'm playing in both fields right now, so we're
exactly.
You know what I mean? So
countries, if they want to be at the forefront of having their data centers, their protections, etc., they need to do mining, because that's the way to make it economically feasible.
Right now,
So that's right now. So I
also have that tool to stabilize the grid and do all these other things. Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah.
So I go to all these places, and again, I don't have a mining background, but I really believe, and this is like almost like a belief that I have, is that if you bring people, same goal, but drastically different expertise and background. Let's say a developer who is in San Francisco. Me, come from Venezuela, economics, politics. Somebody like you also. You bring them together. You will have ideas that I will never have with my economist friends. Never. So I really believe that we need to foster like these places of communication. So for me, it's always a blast to go to mining conferences, Bitcoin conferences, because I meet all these people that I will never meet at the UN or I will never meet at the European Parliament. So I think it's fascinating, and I think this is what we want, and that's what I really advocate for.
My media team is pressing me to wrap this up, but I have one more question for you. What did you think about Nashville?
Oh, it's pretty nice. As a city, you mean? Man, like I was going to this, I don't know the name of them, this main street.
Yeah, the main street. There's just so much activity going on.
Man, like I lived many years in Boca Raton, as I told you. Like so I used to go to Miami every weekend. I don't want to, my Miami friends.
I love Miami too.
Right, but
it's a different vibe.
But Nashville is that was music everywhere.
Yeah, yep.
Like you have like 3 floors, and in every floor was different music playing around.
Yep. At one bar, right? You go to one place. It's like there's a band down here, there's a band in the middle, there's a band, you know what I mean? It was really cool.
It was so cool. Full of young people, happy people, just having a good time. I love it. So it's like my 4th time I have been. So, but it's the first time because before I went to Vanderbilt University. So I went to like a conference. It was like outside the city. Yeah. This was the time I was able to, and I really, really enjoyed it.
What about the Bitcoin conference itself? What did you think?
Super
speaking
nice.
And everything.
Yeah, it was super nice, huge. Like I didn't know it was that huge. Even when I went, super nice. The conversation were excellent. I will be speaking again next year. Also, they have one in Amsterdam, I think. So I think I may, if my...
There's one in Amsterdam, yeah, I think.
If my schedule...
We just had Aaron on, Aaron Van Weerdem, who's with, he's like an editor for the Bitcoin magazine, just wrote his book. So we were talking about that. And he's from that area in Amsterdam. But next year, the one here is going to be in Las Vegas. That's going to be epic. It's going to be unbelievable.
Oh, yes. It's going to be... I have never been to Las Vegas, so I will definitely enjoy it responsibly, but enjoy it. Yeah.
So anybody who's looking to follow your mission or get involved or help, how can they reach out to you? How can they contact you to get more information?
Yeah, so they can go to my Twitter account. They can go to my social media, Jraissati Jorge. I'm sure you will put it in your video somewhere. So go to my social media, send me a message. You can also find my email around. In Google, you can find my message, jorge@econinclusion.org. Send me an email, send me your ideas. I always reply, maybe not just in one day, maybe a couple of days later, but I reply. And let's work together. And we need to do, all of us, whatever we can to make this world a better place. I really believe it. I really believe that we come, all of us, for a mission in life. We have, I don't want to say the word duty, but we have true mission to make this life and this world a better place. It's our legacy. It's the legacy we leave to all children, those who have children or want to have children. And in general, it makes part of a good life. So millions of people depend on also the efforts of bright, talented people, like the people who listen to this podcast, because the technology you guys create or the idea that you guys have consequences, good consequences all over the world. So I think it's our duty. Reach out to me, always willing to help, always willing to have a call and to provide more information.
Jorge Jraissati, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend.